Good afternoon and welcome to our final talk of the day on the Expo channel. My name is Melissa Blackburn and I'm a producer here at Watershed in Bristol. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a white woman in my very late 40s with dark hair and a deep fringe, and I'm wearing a black shirt with big hoop earrings, sitting in front of a blue wall. And I'm joined on my left by British Sign Language interpreter Emily Quigley. Emily's pronouns are she and her. She's a white woman in her early 30s. She's wearing a black shirt and her hair is brown and curly, and she's wearing a black framed glasses. She is sitting at her desk with a light blue wall behind her. We recommend that you have a full screen for this session to get the most out of it. I'm delighted to introduce to you Grace Quantock, who is one of our data research fellows this year for the Southwest Creative Technology Network. And she has been researching how creative technologists can work in a trauma-informed way. We pre-recorded this talk, and I'm happy to say that Grace will be in the chat to answer any questions. But for now, welcome to Grace.
Hello, and welcome to Dramula Talk, Principles for Trauma-Informed R&D. We're exploring how the impact on audiences and outcomes can take your development on a trauma-informed journey. So thank you for joining me today. Thank you, fantastic introduction. I'm so excited to be talking to you about building future technologies in a trauma-informed way, encouraging us to create a world which more folks can engage in without re-traumatization. And I'm excited to share my Southwest Creative Technology Network Data Fellow research with you. And it's research that I am calling Dramula. We're going to look at why trauma-informed research and design is needed, my 3 principles of trauma-informed digital delivery for creative technologists, and we're going to dive into an important aspect of the framework, audience consent and engagement. Because if we want to ethically engage our audiences, we have to take trauma into account. So I am a psychotherapeutic counsellor, a writer and a researcher, and I spent 2020 researching the impact of trauma in technology and looking at how what we can't see shapes our designs and our users' experiences. And also surviving, because 2020, it was extra tough for all of us, and I'm a disabled woman. And so surviving was extra tough at that time, as it was for so many of us. So my fellowship research grew from my own work with clients. I work with people with complex trauma and multiple marginalized and minoritized identities. I support clients who are finding ways often to remove and filter content on the web as part of their trauma work and recovery. Often people were starting to really need to filter or navigate that. And they were doing that by blocking keywords, curating follow lists, using web extensions to control certain websites, setting up Finstagrams of the kind of content that they really needed to be seeing and taking in. And really, they were using technology to avoid triggering or potentially upsetting material and access material that is needed. And I started thinking about what would happen if this type of delivery preference was considered in the world and in the digital design we're building. Because, we were cobbling this together from about 8 different things, and it was clunky and it was difficult, and it definitely needed a lot of fine-tuning. And I researched how people in my fellowship, how people take in and process data when in highly traumatized states. And this involved looking at the Gestalt need satisfaction cycle, reading about critical race theory, queer theory, Jungian approaches to therapy, and interpretations of neuroscientific trauma research and inclusive approaches to engagement. And the framework that I built from this, that I'm calling the Dramula, you see, it's like trauma and formula is Dramula. You see, it's so exciting. No, I call it that because I think it's quite sweet. And it supports creatives and technological culture makers to frame the delivery of their outputs, to responsibly mediate and navigate an individual's data processing, figuring out how trauma and well-being can sit alongside user experience research and work streams. And we're often seeking in design engagement and playfulness. We want people to use what we make. But engagement and playfulness require consent and capacity. And in considering trauma in design, we're taking responsibility for our part in creating space for change, for people to be included in our work and our communities going forward. So, what are we talking about when we talk about trauma? So, trauma might mean situations and events that are traumatic in emotional and psychological trauma, but we also, confusingly, can use trauma to refer to how we are affected by these traumatic experiences. So this is the trauma that lives in our bodies, the trauma that we have, the impact and that stays with us. And traumatic events and experiences can happen, and situations can happen at any age and can cause long-lasting effects and harm. Or lots of people have different reactions to trauma, and some people might notice events very quickly, and some people might experience them a long time afterwards. So what are we talking about? How many people, what's the extent of this problem? I'm not going to give any graphic details of trauma here, but we're just going to look at actually the numbers, just as, we consider this in much of our work. So actually just looking at this, what is happening? So 1 in 5 adults aged 18 to 74 years have reported experiencing at least one form of child abuse, whether that is emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, witnessing domestic violence or abuse, and they report that happening before the age of 16 years. So that's 8.5 million people. Now, these are only some mentions of types of abuse. There's lots of types of abuse outside this. And traumatic life experiences can have incredible impact, incredibly damaging impact on people's lives. And if you've read anything about the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, it can simply be one way of thinking about the idea that actually what we experience in childhood, but I think we can think in this case for us more globally with trauma, can actually have a massive impact for the rest of our lives. So poorer health outcomes, mental health, social and educational outcomes. And NHS education have reported that trauma-informed systems have much better outcomes for people impacted by trauma. And I have a small story to share of my own experience of how this can intersect when we are moving in the digital world or the development of the maker world. So what I often get told when I bring this up, or what I've historically been told, is that I can't design for everybody, Grace. And, there aren't that many people. And, everybody seemed fine when they used my stuff. And, probably they wouldn't like it anyway. Anyway, and so there's a great othering, you notice in those conversations. But, what can happen is the very thing that harmed us can be the thing that we actually find ourselves going back to. So, for example, in some of my research, one person told me a story of somebody, an anecdotal experience, that they were running a VR experience, and somebody came to them and really wanted to try it. But they noticed the person looked really sick, like they looked almost green, they looked very nauseated. I said, what's going on? And the person shared a story, kind of that classic thing, the VR had been taken to a workplace in previous situation and done very badly. There'd been no care and attention to the moving between the spaces. And the person experienced a very disorienting and painful and dramatic experience for themselves. And yet they were also turning up and trying to go in the VR again. And the person who's running this VR was really confused, kind of saying, why would you try and go back when it was so horrible for you? But they weren't understanding that there can be attempts to complete a trauma cycle, to repair and to fix the pain. And so the very people who we think might be at risk of what we're designing, of some of the aspects of it, can be the very people who may well actually be particularly attracted to it because they're in some way attempting to repair or support themselves. But we haven't designed it with them in mind. And there's a problem. And, I want to share, as I said, a fictionalized composite example from my own life and interactions with technology. So in this, I was engaged in an immersive AR app, which was looking at a playful engagement with space and reimagining and exploring space. So I was taken through a group experience with this, and my responses were very dissociative. So I very much checked out. Dissociation is a common response to trauma. It's one of my responses that I used, that was a part of my way of surviving. So I checked out. And so what happened was really interesting. So there was feedback. We were offered to give feedback on this app, but the feedback was done straight after. And I was still in a trauma response. So I was like, yeah, sure, it's fine. Yeah. And, everybody else in the group seemed okay. So I felt ashamed. It was just me, again, being traumatized and mad again, broken again, being awkward and not liking what's being done to me again. And I didn't feel I wasn't in a place where I could even understand what was happening because of the trauma response. And, it was so immersive, and, there was no kind of assessing as to who it might be safe for or how we might support people. And, one of the images that came from it kind of really stuck with me, and it's come back to me since. So I might be on the way to the bus stop pre-pandemic, and I'd kind of, because we were re-envisaging areas, around us, our localities, I could kind of see it. No, I'm not hallucinating in that. That's not part of my experience, but it was a very visceral memory that kind of came back to me in those times and kind of haunted me, and that was tough. Now, many people would orient this issue in me. You see, I'm the one who has the trauma. I'm the one it didn't work for. It worked for everybody else, which is not for me. How convenient for the designer to see those problems as located in me and my disabled body. And there's an idea there that only I have a problem, which actually isn't true. In this particular instance, I spoke to other people who reported similar issues. And if we think there's no issues with what we're designing, maybe we don't feel like a safe person to tell. And later I was able to recalibrate, to get support, to draw my resources and loved ones and practices like my journal. And I did feedback about the experience, and was able to kind of say, do people in your use of this app, do people have a struggle with language afterwards? Do you find participants do that? And are we assuming it's kind of like all tech? A bit patronizing? Could they actually be dissociated? Could there be a trauma response? Have we missed a mental health aspect here? Now, a way to address this, just as an example, would be to signpost trapdoors very clearly. This is how when I teach about mindfulness, I always teach it's located in your body. So sometimes if you've done a meditation, you'll see, imagine a meadow in your mind, go to the meadow. They might say, I don't do that because, it's immediately, for me, dissociative. We're going outside of ourselves and following the person's voice, very instructive. And instead, I locate people in a neutral space under their own control, in their home or their bodies or somewhere that feels safe with that. And we start at the beginning. Here's how to come out. I'm inviting, but I'm not instructing you. And I know that in design, there's fear that if we do this, or if we build trapdoors, our audiences will opt out. But what happens when they're checking out anyway? because creative technologists can assess the impact of our delivery methods. We can responsively support people to engage with our work without overwhelm and trauma when we do this work. And in my Trauma framework, I've created psychological processes to bring in filtration, titration, digestion, and containment to users' contact with data-generating devices and spaces. So let's talk about how we build that into R&D itself. Because we can't ignore the trauma of potential users. When we design for a specific community, we often take in the experiences, the characteristics of that community. They're often taken into account. Like if you're designing for teens or for older adults or for grime fans, you're going to have an understanding of the psychographics of that audience and what works for them and where they are and what they do and don't want, and you're designing for what people need. And it's not uncommon for organizations to draw up detailed profiles of future users, buying habits, preferences, and user behavior. But if technologists aren't taking into account the trauma load a user group may be carrying, then what are we missing? Now, what we do with all that data and whether we have the right to gather it is a whole different thing. But what we're missing is what I'm talking about today. And so I'd like to share with you my 3 principles for trauma-informed digital delivery for creative technologists. Number 1, see the states of trauma. First principle, see the states of trauma. So you've probably come across some of these trauma responses. You may have heard of fight or flight. It's actually fight, flight, freeze, flop, and friend. So these trauma responses that we can recognize in ourselves, we need to recognize also if our audiences are getting stuck, or are we creating spaces where a trauma response may be being triggered, and how can we address that? Now, we don't have time today, unfortunately, to go into these in detail, but I can just talk briefly about what we might start seeing, just to have an understanding of how these trauma responses can actually interact with our design process. So, for example, anger, we think, fight, we think, we know that one. How would that work with my R&D? Well, are you seeing moments perhaps when users are becoming very frustrated with the tech or the interface? Could there be something in play here, some kind of activation response? A flight. This would be in R&D where I'd expect to be seeing attrition of users, people dropping off, opting out. Freeze. This would be where in this work I'd be expecting to see people going to freeze. They might be scrolling without engagement, not completing, drifting. So freeze, we know fight, we know flight often. Freeze is something that can be a little less, we're less sure about it. Freeze can just be when we become frozen and just stop and shut down. But then we also have flop, which is the next stage. So flop's really interesting and horrible. Flop is when we're still following directions and moving and doing what we're kind of told, but we're not actually engaging. So in flop, I expect people to see people going through the process, but falling away when there are choices. So if they have to make a decision in the process, I'd expect to see that's when these people would start to kind of disengage and stop following the user journey because they aren't in a place where they're engaged with that executive function to make that choice at that moment. And then the last stage is the last possibility in this way of seeing is friend. So generally this is when in a trauma response we try to befriend the person who's harming us or somebody who might protect us. So in this work I would be questioning this in very intense fan behavior or very intense community engagement. I'd just be wondering, is anything being pulled in there? Is there anything of this there? And how might we do something about that? And, I'm not saying that these behaviors are from these things whatsoever. I'm simply offering what a questioning and engagement and interest in what might be happening for our users and what we might actually be unintentionally building into our design that we need to consider for best practice and safe, ethical use. So the second principle is build brakes before you accelerate. Build brakes before you accelerate. And I'm going to take a momentary break myself before I accelerate. Thank you. So in this, I know often when we start designing and making, we are off and we want, of course, to get people in. We want to get them into the journey, through the workings, having that moving and moving and moving. But build brakes before you accelerate comes from the work of Babette Rothschild, who wrote the books The Body Remembers. And she describes a story where she was learning to drive. She learned to drive in New York. And after she learned to drive, her father gave her a car. It's very exciting. And then she learned to drive quite young. And her friend said, will you teach me? Of course, I'll teach you. And they got in the car and they got ready. And her friend was in the driving seat. And she went, oh my goodness, you're about to drive my car. My new car, and I have no way to stop you, and you don't know how to drive yet, because she realized there were no dual controls, of course. And she said, okay, hold on. She was starting to teach me, this is how you do the ignition, this is how you do the clutch, this is how you start to get into gear and move forward. She said, no, I need to teach you how to brake before I can teach you how to go forward. And this is something that I do with my own clients. So often when clients first come in, and if you have been to therapy, maybe you have your own experience of this, and I have done it myself as a client, that really often you'll come in and there'll be a sense that, you really kind of want to discharge and just kind of spit everything out and get it out there and get it done and try and heal. The thing is, often we have to slow that down, because if somebody comes in and just throws everything out, that can be very destabilizing for them. And the fact is, they have to go home and deal with a whole week of whatever's been destabilized. And actually, I get to go home and, play with my dogs and do fun things like reading books and drawing and taking Polaroid photos. And I don't have to sit with their destabilization, but they do. So, really aware of that and actually having to, build in learning how we brake before we can actually start to move forward. And so in the work, this can look like building in exits and options. So for example, on my own website, quite a lot of years ago now, I got a bit concerned because people kept saying to me that they were finding it very sticky, that they loved it, but I was going to email saying, I spent 6 hours on your website, 8 hours on your website, on your website every night this week. I'm kind of, that's wonderful, and I appreciate that, but also that's really worrying to me, because I wouldn't spend 6 hours talking at you. I'd be like, hey, like 30 minutes, hey, do we need a break? Drink, nap, snack, pee break, screen break. And, a lot of this I was doing before we kind of had this Zoom world where when we're used to the need for screen breaks. And so I actually designed pop-ups that were almost reverse. They were actually saying to people, hey, you've been on this website a while and I really love that you love my stuff, but this website will be here tomorrow. Go to bed, maybe have a nap, take care of yourself. Here are some options to take care of yourself. And wrote a guide about what to actually do when you find yourself stuck after all of this scrolling. And it's now something I'm working within the cluster with. I'm building work from the BBC Cymru with, which is really exciting. As the third principle we have is assess the activation and regulation seesaw. So we are all in a dance in this way of thinking of activation, where we become energized, activated, anxious, up, and regulation when we regulate back to our baseline. And this is something which we need to look at and think about with when we're asking the people we work with to become activated and to go back. And it's a very, very gentle exercise when we start, which we can do just now. I'm going to take you through a very small exercise. Now, when I start, I'm going to do this, and when I finish, I'm going to do this. So if you don't want to see the exercise, if you don't want to engage, it's absolutely okay. You can just wait, you can just mute, and then when you see me do this again, we'll be done. If at any point you want to come out of the exercise, I recommend you can just do whatever feels good for you, but I recommend kind of wiggling bottom or feet or a part of your body you have quite a lot of feel and connection with, and then say, I'm back. I'm back. And you can look around and see things. So what we're going to do is we're going to think about a time that was anxiety producing, and then we're going to orient and look at something that feels safe and soothing. Just so we know. Okay. So if you want to get started with me, that's what we're going to do. We're going to start by imagining the last time we felt excited or anxious. And just notice what happens to the body. Just picture the time, what we felt like, noticing how our body felt, perhaps think of some of the details of it, and just notice what happened. And now I know as I do this, my chest gets a little tighter, my jaw gets a little tighter, start to feel prickles of perspiration, start to feel a little faster in my thoughts get a little more racing. So just noticing that is an activation. That's what activation looks like for me at this point, a mild activation. And then we're going to orient. So this is an exercise from my teacher, Marion Dunley. And to orient, we're just going to allow ourselves to look around the room. Just taking your eyes for a wander and just let them rest on something that feels pleasant to rest your eyes on. It doesn't have to be something that's particularly emotionally beautiful or meaningful. It could be a shadow on the wall. It could be anything. It's just something that just feels gentle. When you rest your eyes on it, you just go, whew, that feels nice. So we're just going to look at it, describe it to ourselves, think about its texture, its shape, and then just check back in and notice, how do I feel? And if that feels good, keep going. We're still got a little bit of that activation there. We could do it again. Fantastic, wonderful. And then we're just going to reorient back to me here, if you can. So just as you look around, just start allowing yourself to take in the screen just becoming more and more part of your orientation, and coming back to re-engage. Fantastic. Okay, well done. Wonderful. And now, just before we close, we're going to take a very, very quick look at a specific aspect of Principle 2, building breaks before you accelerate, by talking about audience engagement, which in this work is talking about choice and consent. And this part of working is called an exercise I designed called Finding Our Teeth. Because abuse breaks boundaries. That's what abuse is a breaking of boundaries. And destruction of boundaries can mean that after we struggle to discern, because our boundaries got broken. And so we can struggle to have a sense of what is in and what is out, and what is yes and not, what is mine and what is not mine. And the sense of the internal, the external, of even what is me and my edges can be impacted. So, sometimes it can feel like our no got stolen. What happens after that? So there's an exercise in my Trauma Leader workshop drawn from my client work called Finding Our Teeth. So how to understand this is, in a consensual way, engagement might look something like you're become aware of something you're interested in. You feel your teeth. You bite a piece off, chew it over. This could be a piece of media, something you're thinking about, a thought, something somebody offers you, whatever it might be, something we're going to engage with. It could be processing it using an app. So bite a piece off, we check in, might chew it over, spit out what doesn't work for us, swallow what feeds us, digest it, assimilate it, feel some satisfaction, possibly if it's fed us. Then some hunger or interest arises again, and we go and seek out something else. So when people are going to the app, they're using your product, they're doing this, there may be a cycle of this they're going through. However, often in a way where there has been trauma, it can look like feeling empty, going to something, swallowing it whole. It kind of plays out, it's introject, it kind of plays out in us in an undigested way, and then we just spit it out when we can't tolerate it anymore, or sometimes at people. And instead of this, we're looking to think, how are we helping? How are we making it possible for people to engage in a regulated way with our work? How in our work are we giving options for people to find and use their teeth, versus capitalizing on any propensity for them to just gulp things down, and in that way potentially re-traumatizing by reenacting that overriding of consent? This work can run alongside customer journeys, demographics, and be part of our ethical, inclusive design as creatives. It's complex, but so is our work, and so are humans. We've talked about some aspects today that I'd love you to keep thinking about as you go forward and make things in our beloved world. As creative technologists and culture makers, we can perpetuate or we can creatively challenge trauma and pain in our digital design and our data delivery. I look forward to building a trauma-informed world with better gaming, media, and creative technologies. You can join me at gracequantock.com. That's Grace Quantock, Quantock.com. And you can go to bit.ly/trauma principles to download a copy of my 3 principles for trauma-informed digital delivery for creative technologists. That's bit.ly/trauma principles. And thank you for being here, and thank you for being you.